is we're going to let these men lead us, in a sense, in a panel discussion with some of their thoughts and experience and wisdom. And then we're going to actually open up the floor. Just, again, for a time of sharing your experience, some of your thoughts, even in reflection of what's happening here tonight, and or questions for the panel. So when we get to that section, we've got a microphone right down here. We'll talk about that in a moment, and then we'll certainly close with prayer. We had a little bit of a dilemma. Thank you, men, for coming. We originally thought down here and closer, we want to be close to everybody, but wondered if we'd be able to see you guys. So I hope you're okay up there. And I want to thank you, men, for being willing to come and serve you or serve us. I'm wondering, just to kind of kick us off with a question, when we talk about the events that I mentioned of about a month ago, where the country was made aware, yet again, of gun violence against African Americans, and then certainly the retaliation of sorts in Dallas, and the events of that time. I'm wondering if you men would just start by sharing with us, if you could go back to those moments personally, and just share how did that hit you? What was your experience of that week like? What were your feelings? What were your thoughts as that week transpired?
Well, I'll start. I'll say, like many people, there was lamenting, there was sorrowfulness, there was a stillness, there was man, my body does not know exactly how to, my emotions, my body doesn't know how to necessarily respond. For me, as an individual, I had many temptations and tried to figure out, well, where should I stand and where should I run? What should be my position in the midst of all the lamenting? Because me personally, I'll be very honest, I start with my experience. My experience is I grew up in a culture of disregard for law enforcement. And so I've had bad experience with law enforcement. Before I came to Christ, I was a criminal. The Lord saved me, and I felt God called me into law enforcement. So I've been to law enforcement academies, one military, 2 civilian, so maybe I should run to the law enforcement tribe with the brothers in blue. I'm a Christian minister. Maybe I should run to the corner and say, well, let's just preach the old rugged cross and not get caught up in the social issues of the day, because we don't want to be confused with a social agenda. But where I concluded is that under the umbrella of this glorious news about Jesus, all of the voices in the discussions, and there's more than those 3 voices, but those who feel that there is systemic injustice and oppression, God hears their voice. Those in law enforcement, and law enforcement is a noble career. God hears their voices and the hardships and the difficulties, and He's also aware of the injustices that sprout up in law enforcement. And then those who are indifferent, who have the banner of the cross, God is aware of those voices. But I do believe where I came away with is that God would have us to respond more than just emotions, but with action. So,
racial reconciliation has been a heartbeat of our church for years, and being a good friend of mine, Nigel Anderson, he preaches at our church once a month, and it's been something that we have been having these conversations over and over and over. It's broke my heart that it's still true that one of the most segregated times in America is still on Sunday mornings. And I've just wrestled as a middle-class white guy of like, how do I engage with the church that's in a prominently white community in Norfolk, and yet how does our church represent our city? And how does our church reflect our city? And how does our church serve our city? And how does our church care for all of our city, not just one segment or population? That week, I was taking my daughter, who just graduated 5th grade, and we were going to do a father-daughter trip to the mountains for 2 days. And so we left on Thursday, and this is when the Philando Castile video just came up. As I was driving and listening to the radio, this was the news. And I had part once past Charlottesville, and my phone didn't get reception any longer. And I panicked, that moment when your phone doesn't get reception. Oh no. But my phone went out, and I was out for 48 hours of connectivity. And I was coming back Saturday, and I hit the same spot. And it was literally that moment, my phone just blew up. I mean, text and Facebook. And I think what struck me the most was how within 48 hours, and I looked through my Facebook feed, and I saw texts coming in from many of my friends who are African American who were mad and upset and grieving and crying. And I have friends who are in law enforcement who were defending. And it just struck me how quickly we as a country were, how polarized and how fragmented we were. Within 48 hours, looking through, I could just see there were people who were putting their stake in the ground of, if he didn't, or, see, look, they deserved. And just these blanket statements that were coming out and trying to make sense of, like, what did I miss? 5 officers? We were just trying to kind of get my head and my heart around what was happening. And I called my friend Nigel, and he was slated to preach that next Sunday at our church. And he was like, man, I don't even know if I can preach tomorrow. He's like, I'm just so torn up by all of this. He's like, I've literally been weeping and crying for people who I love. It just seems like, why are we still in this situation? And he's like, what do we do? And it was a hard question, but it was an easy one to answer, because the answer was like, let's just do what we've been doing. Let's just bring this conversation that we've been having for the past 2 years, and let's bring it to Sunday morning church. On Sunday morning, we're just going to have an open discussion about race and equality, and not hide from what is happening. But as Scripture says, we're going to enter into this. We're going to grieve with those who grieve. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to move past us being stuck in corners. And what you find is people go to corners primarily because of fear. We're fearful. We're fearful of what we don't know, for what we don't understand. We're fearful of what we're threatened by. And so we tend to find people who look like us and think like us and identify as like us. And we just want to kind of encamp ourselves with those people. And Nigel and I said, we're just going to try to break through that and have the most honest discussion that we can have in front of our church community. And so we met that morning at 7 o'clock at the Waffle House and wrote out a script for Sunday morning. And just saw how God met our community, and how we tried to wrestle through. We don't have all the answers. We don't understand everything, but what we do know is that the church needs to be having this conversation. The church cannot shy away, cannot pull away from this conversation. In fact, the church needs to be a leading voice in the conversation. Because as Charles was alluding to, we have a hope. We have a unity that we have because of Jesus that calls us to be one together, but also at the same time accepts and embraces the diversity of the church. So what we're not saying is like everyone's the same. No, there are important differences between myself as a white American and some of my friends who are black American. There's cultural differences, there's values, there's things that are different, and it's not that we need to change those things, it's simply that we need to be willing to see the beauty in our differences rather than being threatened by them. And so we've just tried to, over the past month or so, work through that and keep this conversation going as to how do we do this, what does this look like?
Eric, thank you for this conversation, and thank you for allowing me to be on the panel today. To speak to my emotions the week of the shootings, I have to say that I had several competing emotions. And I think one of them was, as an African-American man, when I saw the video of Alton Sterling, I was both shocked, I was mad, and I was sad. I think I was shocked that we are still experiencing what appeared to be the case in that video clip that I saw. which felt like an assault not on Alton Sterling alone, but it felt like it was an assault on all African American men. It brought back to mind sort of a life narrative, a meta-narrative, African American meta-narrative, that the African American man is a liability to society, whether it can be justified or not. I felt like I was, in a way, trapped within a culture, among a people that just can't move beyond what I saw, because the visual was reminiscent of slavery, Jim Crow, lynching in the South, everything you see in the history in movies, that's what it looked like. And then when Philando Castile was shot, those same emotions were intensified. I grieved because I felt when I saw these guys, they looked like my family. And so it felt like a family member was shot, moving beyond the sort of meta-narrative of the African American. It felt personal. And then it was that feeling that in the evening when I run or walk in the neighborhood and I'm not a professor, I don't have on my bow tie or Robert, your wife likes my pocket square, by the way. We gotta get you one. But when I'm not dressed the part, I look just like these guys. And I'm thinking, what if it was me? So it went from my family, who is not a professor, some of them are not, and they would have embodied sort of that behavior, the style, the selling of the CDs and all of that, to wow, that could just be me out there, right? Because it didn't look like he had a chance. He had a chance. He didn't have, neither one had a day in court. And this is not, and then the next feeling I had was, this is not in isolation. This is a continuum. We had Trayvon Martin, and the list just goes on. I can't even remember all the names off the top of my head in the moment. But all of these cases where it feels, Mike Brown, it brought back, I went to Ferguson after that, and I met with people in the neighborhood who saw the whole situation. I felt their pain. I listened to their story their story was never heard. We saw a lot of marching and a lot of sort of what one might consider deviant behavior, but we didn't hear the story. How did they even get there? And so all of those emotions were kind of at once, and I could not sleep for 3 nights straight. And I remember that Saturday morning, I have Saturday morning prayer at 7:30 on the phone, teleconference. After the prayer, I sat in my office at home on the floor like a little boy and just boo-hoo cried. Because I felt, on the one hand, helpless, on the other hand, hopeless. But then I felt that I had a burden of responsibility, as if I had not spoken up like I should have when it was Trayvon Martin. Or else we wouldn't be how many deaths later in this position. So you feel this personal responsibility. And then, the last thing I'll say, then that sort of went to, okay, as a Christian, who am a preacher, community worker, why are we still mushy in church? Talking the church talk, doing the Christian thing, and nobody would, in my circles, would agree that hate is correct. Everybody would agree that you're supposed to love, but somewhere this love, this faith, all of that up in the skies doesn't make it to the ground. And because as soon as something happens on the ground, we scatter. And then we'll show back up at church and love on each other. But then you see stuff on Facebook and Twitter that just seems like, man, we don't even know each other. People don't really know why people feel the way they do. I said last week that I'm a Pentecostal preacher, so we have 3. You asked, you didn't say how many points we should make. All right, the last thing that I will say, because we have to move on. But I felt the sense of, man, this feels like injustice in the justice system. And there are no real advocates to help in the justice system. And so it felt as if this institutional, what I call institutional racism, pervades, and in the end of the day, it wins. That's what it felt like.
There's so much. my mind is sparking lots of different directions. But I guess maybe the next question for you to consider or answer is, one of the positive things is we're having a conversation like this. This is new to me. I've never stood at Park Place United Methodist and led a moderated panel like this. I think that there is a growing sense that something needs to be done, and I'm glad that even in a clumsy or small way we're able to do something tonight. Why do you believe it's important that we're having this conversation, and not just in general, but even tonight? Why is this important? Why is this a good thing? Why is this conversation necessary now? Because we all could have, in a sense, moved on, right? I mean, and as a matter of fact, in our planning of something after those events, our desire was to do something quicker, sooner than later. And yet, it seemed like in God's providence, for us to now be a month later and still caring about this is a good thing, right? So I guess that's my question. Why is this an important conversation for the issues of racial injustice, systemic injustice, racial divide?
I'll say this. I'll say you brothers hit on two things that were very helpful for me. You said embedded in your church's identity is a passion, a love, a conviction about racial reconciliation. And I'm just going to say you took that from the Bible. That's the Bible storyline, that there would no longer be Jew and Gentile Christians. Just go to your Jew church, just go to your Gentile church. But that God's plan from the beginning of the ages was that Jews and Gentiles would be in the same local church under the lordship of Jesus, committed to carrying out with one another, loving one another, honoring one another, giving preference to one another in this thing we call the community of God, the church. But also, you said something that was extremely helpful to me when you pointed out the problem of, we get these deep, these robust truths, but we're having difficulties having them trickle down, right? And so, racial reconciliation, it's clear, it's in the text, it's in the scripture, it's God's plan. But I think where we're missing it is the practical, day-to-day manifestations of that. And so I say the discussion is important because we as a church, we have an opportunity in the midst of all of this chaos and turmoil to say, not to simply say, hey, we got it right over here, right? But to say, hey, we are a picture of God's plan for the world. And in the midst of the chaos, to give them, it won't be a perfect picture, right? God's church should be able to display a picture that's close to the heart of God. And so the church has a responsibility to put on display what God's will is in the midst of the diversity of the people. People united under the gospel, and not just for 1 hour on Sunday, but people who are integrated and woven into each other's lives. So when things like this happen, well, brother, I'm already in community with you. We already have a relationship. We already meet together for meals. You're already at my house. You're playing with my kids in my living room. Now, chaos strikes. Well, let's talk about this in more detail, that I might be a blessing to you, that you might be a blessing to me, and that we might put on display what God desires to put on display. Because it's His will that the church would have that beautiful picture of reconciliation under the lordship of Jesus. So I think we as the church, we have to get it right, one. And two, we have all of the goods necessary and needed for us to be on the right trajectory, mainly what Christ has accomplished on the cross. He's accomplished the shalom. He's accomplish the peace. Now the question is, are we going to do the hard work as Spirit-endowed people of loving people who are different from us, different backgrounds than us, different pigmentation in their skin than us, but trusting in the same Christ as us? And that's not easy. There's not a 5-step plan to that. That takes hard work, and it won't happen in the short term. We all need to have a long-term view toward being committed to showing that picture. So.
Two words that I think about that combine both of these together. One is that we're called to be one. Jesus prays in John 17, I pray that they would be one. That there would be a unity among the brothers. As he leaves, he prays for oneness. Sameness, that's not the same as sameness. Oneness and sameness are different. And so what that means, if I'm going to be one with my brother, I have to know him. And the only way I'm going to know him is that I'm going to be intentional. I agree. Getting white and black people in the same building is not the goal. JC can do that. Anybody can do that, right? That's an easier thing to do. Getting each other. So what happened in our church is I had all these people say, next week I'm going to a black church. And I was like, good intention. Good intention. But how about you? Yeah, you leave your tithing offering at Crossroads. But go over there and visit for one Sunday. That's all you have permission to do. But I said, so my counter to that was, rather than just going and being in the same room, that's not a bad idea, but who is already currently in your life who looks different than you, that you can invite into your life? Who's the coworker, the neighbor, the friend's mom, the aunt that you can actually say, I've got to start to become intentional to realize this. This is what I've kind of said through this journey, is I have a perspective. But my perspective is of a middle-class white guy who has never had to deal with injustice, who's never been shown prejudice because of the color of my skin. So I have a perspective, and I have a narrative, and I have a story, but I also have to come to the conclusion that mine is not complete. And if I'm simply going to make decisions based off of my story, that is a very, very limited story. And I have to create space to have relationships with other people, to know other stories, to gain greater perspective. And one of the things Antipas said is that this isn't an isolated incident. This isn't just one time it happened over here. This is reoccurring over and over and over. So the first word I would say is we got to be in a relationship, and that's the job of the church within itself. The second word is we have a responsibility. The responsibility is how we engage the world. The responsibility is how do we look at systems of oppression and injustice, systematic systems that have been in place since the foundation of our country, that still are producing, we've had bad roots that are producing horrible fruits. And we've got to start, for me, people ask me the question, well, what am I supposed to do about that? I've never owned a slave. I've heard that from my camp. I never owned a slave. What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to take responsibility for that? And there's just so much. We had a conversation the other night where somebody, a gentleman who was at one of these talks we were doing, said, I've heard the term white privilege, but I've never understood it until tonight. And so part of it is I don't necessarily need to take responsibility for what's happened in the past, but I need to recognize the past. I have the responsibility to recognize what has happened that has led us to where we are today. And I do have a responsibility to work towards how do we change that, because it's not right. It's not right. There is oppression and injustice against people simply because of the color of their skin. Because they're the minority. They're not the ones who are in authority or in power in our country. And because of that, they face significant oppression in their life every single day. I need to be aware of that, and I need to care about them so much that I'm willing to say that's not right. I have a responsibility now to not just watch what's happening. I am called to action to serve and love my brothers in the same way that I am treated. And so there's a responsibility I have, a call to action to begin to implement change in the society that we live in. We can talk about what that change is at some point.
Thanks for the question. I think we should have this conversation because the problem of what one may term as police brutality as well as attitudes and assaults against police, is all of our problem. It's everybody's problem. Both of those. And then I don't even think those are the real problems. I think the problems are deeper than that. I think that those are the tipping points. But it's a historical narrative that we oftentimes ignore. It's personal, it's meta-narratives that are shaped by history and consistent personal stories that contribute to a whole. I can't tell you how many African American men have had money in the police. While most police are good, but yet how many African American men have had run-in with a few bad police? Beyond that, we know somebody. Like, for instance, if it weren't me, I know somebody who had a bad experience. And everybody was not a criminal. Oftentimes, we're assumed to be criminals. And I think it's deeper than that, because what we see on the evening news is not all the time the criminal activity. But when you live in a society that is filled with privilege and underprivilege, superiority and inferiority, and our whole fabric of American society was shaped by that. And depending on which side of the line you're on is how you experience that. And so, even as an African-American male young professor, I have to win the right to speak, to educate some white men, because there's an assumption that he might not know what he's talking about really. That's the fact. That's not my problem. That's all of our problem. We have a society that has shaped the way we think, and even some African American people are victims of that. Wherein, if it's white, it's right. And sometimes we don't even realize it, but we've been shaped by a society that has told us that. And I think that type of, when you learn to live like that, you learn to survive in those structures. And when you don't get the benefit of those structures, you get frustrated. And sometimes we don't know how to react to it. And I think those are the type of the systemic, structural, what we call racism. Because sometimes we think of racism, if I say racism, I don't know if we're going to have a class on racism, but everybody in here probably have a different idea of what that means. And most of the time, people think it has to do I like black people? And that's not racism, that's prejudice. Racism is really rooted in a system of power and oppression. And if you're not in part of the group that can oppress another group, then you cannot be racist. You can be prejudiced, but you can't be racist. Racism, if I ask you how many races do we have in the world, we can only talk about two, black and white. It breaks down immediately, because the whole notion of race was when the Europeans looked at the Africans and said that they are not human. So in the animal system, they are of another race. They're not human race. So we live out that. We need to problematize that whole idea that I'm of the black race and you're of the white race, because that's the root of racism. That itself sets a structure that you are superior and I'm inferior. Right? You have different ethnicities, but you really don't have different races. And so racism has framed the American society in such a way that even when in Williamsburg, when in 1700s, there were more slaves than there were white people, because the mechanism to develop the country it was like a machine. Black people were machines to make all this stuff work. Right? That's why the South wanted to keep them. One reason, because if you do away with slavery, you do away with the machine, the mechanism to build the country. So in that way, the country itself was built on the backs of black people. And although the laws changed, the attitudes didn't change as quickly as the laws. And codified in the systemic structure, there was really no protection for African Americans, and there was no accessibility for African Americans. So what we have now is we have, even in Ferguson, people were disenfranchised, meaning they were not in the war room discussing the planning of the city. So they'll know how to predict for the future and adjust to. They just start getting laid off from their factory jobs, and eventually they were shipped out. You were not part of that conversation, right? So now you learn to survive at like St. Paul Quadrant. They learn to survive not knowing how to connect. They didn't have influence nor influence, have no connectivity. And to me, that's a system of racism that we have not overcome, and that's why we should have this conversation. Because usually people feel good. I got a black friend. I got a white friend. That's not the issue. It's not what. It's the system of oppression that keeps certain people at bay. And if we don't confront that, we'll just all be naive to it and keep living in it. How's that? Did that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Disagree with me. Like a good old fight.
I ain't fighting you.
Let me counter that for just a moment. No, really. So that is the story. Understanding the narrative of where we've got to today is important, but we also, just to kind of the big scope of the story of humanity, is that these issues are playing out in the physical realm. They're playing out through relationships, but this issue that we're dealing with is indicative of the sinful nature of all of humanity. And we just need to understand that it has taken different shapes and forms throughout generations and years. But you come to Genesis 3, the fall of man, and then you see in Genesis 4 that Cain gets jealous of his brother Abel, and so he takes justice into his own hands and he kills his brother. Because he didn't feel like what God was doing was fair. And so he decided at that moment that he was going to be to take justice into his own hands by murdering his brother Abel. And so we need to remember that even as the laws change, which we need to fight for and we have a responsibility for, we also have to recognize that the foundational issue that is at play here is the condition of the human heart. Until the human heart is able to be changed, until the human heart is able to be transformed, until the human heart is able to have a rebirth into a new way of living, a new values, a new set of ideals, then you can change the system, you can change the law. And this is essentially what we've seen in America, right? So we're 60 years past the civil rights movement. We're 8 years of an African-American president, and here we are in 2016, still dealing with the same issues. Because the hearts are what need to be changed in people. So morality, behavior, systems of oppression, yes, they need to be addressed. Absolutely. But we also have to realize that these are all indicative. They all stem from somewhere, and the root of those things is the sinful nature of the human heart.
So just maybe jumping off of both of those, in my experience, my heart has never changed if I didn't think it needed to change. Right? So there's a part of what you're saying, Antipas, that if there's a blanket statement, hey, I'm not racist, I've got black friends, therefore I've just removed myself from the issue, and then therefore the need for any heart change that needs to happen. I guess maybe one thing that could be helpful just to maybe focus back on those events from a month ago. And forward. I mean, this morning we all woke up to news from Wisconsin overnight about the same thing. And this is going to continue, right? It doesn't seem like there's an end in sight. My question is, and it's for all three of you, but what could you describe for us, what is the outcry? Right? I mean, if you've got particularly white America watching the TV and just thinking, what is going on here? in order to see the emotions and the marches that will quickly develop, or even riots at times, and retaliation. But if you dial into that, what is it? What is the outcry that is coming? What does African American men and women want us to know or to hear? And though it might not be the most productive mechanism for that, and some of the things that we've seen, what lies at the heart of, we wish you would understand, we wish you would hear us? You know what I mean? That, fill in the blank. What is that? And you are getting at some of those deeper issues. And I don't want to put you to speak for others. But how do you think about it?
So I'd say it would seem over the course of 2 or 3 years that there's this long chain of events that seem to depict that predominantly African American men, that their lives are of no value and that they're throwaways. Now, I told you I worked in law enforcement for 2 years, and I want to give you a tangible example that's consistent with that statement, that their lives are just throwaways, they're not worth anything. There was an officer, and he was successful in the suburbs with suburban kids and catching them with drugs, marijuana. Of course, kids will be kids, right? Well, that became a problem in our department because, of course, these young, white, affluent kids who have bags of drugs, they have a future. And so we don't want to mess that up. They're just being kids. And so they moved this officer to the lower income, predominantly African American housing project area because he's going to do a stellar job out there, right? And these kids can, at 16, 17, 18, get a federal charge or spend their time in prison because they're of course, they're on that trajectory. They're bad for society. They're not just being kids. And so that's a systemic issue. And again, I'll be honest, I struggle with some of the answers. I think that's the bigger picture, systems and structures. On the ground level, I believe I have a framework that God has given me to engage with some of the things you're talking about. I just really struggle with. But that's a systems issue, where law enforcement is saying, well, these guys down here in the housing project, they don't have a future. They're not going to go to college. They're not going to go to the military and become leaders for our country. They're not going to be upstanding citizens and have wives and have children and be productive contributors to society. So it's okay that they spend some time in prison. That's a systemic issue. And when you see a trail of murders, there's an outcry that's saying whether it's prison, whether it's educational opportunity, whether it's employment opportunity, whether it's health care, whether it's a list of a myriad of things, whether it's just, can I see another day? There's this cry that's saying, hey, we desire opportunities as well. We desire to live. We desire to have the opportunity to live another day. But there's this long chain. It's not just isolated events. And it seems that nobody is hearing our cries. Just like as Cain rose up and slew his brother, and now there's blood crying from the street, and no one cares. People are quick to explain it away. People aren't doing what you've encouraged, a self-evaluation. In the midst of a self-evaluation, saying, hey, you know what? I just know myself. I know that I have remaining sin. I'm missing something. But people would prefer to say, you know what? I got my framework. I got my stance. I got all the answers. You'll say these 10 things. I got these 10 responses. Versus all of us saying, you know what? I probably got blind spots. I'm probably missing something. And having a humble posture and going and saying, hey, could you help me? Having a humble posture and saying, let me go down to the Norfolk Public Library and read up on the history of Norfolk so I can make some parallels about the 1800s, about the 1900s, and saying, yes, there are implications from 100 or 200 years ago that are still affecting us in 2016 going in 2017. And I think people want an acknowledgement of that, not because we want a pity ticket, but an acknowledgement of that and an awareness, and to be able to humbly take that data and respond and work together to come to some resolutions. So.
was the question again?
That's why I give it to you, by the way.
Okay, yeah, I think that's grief. I think what we see now is that when you see officers in Tamir Rice's situation get off, you know, how many of these guys are going to be held accountable, right? When you see Zimmerman, who was not an officer, even the charges that were against him were not even the correct charges, so then you get off, you know, on the basis of standing on the ground as if Trayvon Martin didn't have a ground to stand, or a person coming and wanted to ask information who was not even a police officer. So there is that feeling that justice just is not going to be done for the black guy. That's the feeling. That's the collective feeling. So people feel that they need to take matters in their own hand, and it only makes it worse. Of course, I don't agree with it. But you ask what outcry. Outcry is justice is not going down properly in this country for the African American man. And so that's part of it. Next is the events as they happen, the personal connection with those events. They have no one to go to actually plead for help and actually feel like they get exploited. Right? Black Lives Matter. I am not a part of Black Lives Matter, but I know people who are a part of Black Lives Matter. And one is a preacher I know in Atlanta who I've seen him on television, all this stuff, and he thinks he's great, right? So he told me, I said, well, I called him with the same question. Why are you guys protesting and stopping traffic? He was the leader of the whole pack. I said, why are you doing this? He said, because we are in solidarity with the hurting. And we have to stop America to be in solidarity with people that are broken. There has to be a moment when you have to force people to stop and see that people are serious. He said, but what they show on television are marches and a few incidents. He said, the truth is, he's a lawyer too. He said, the truth is that they're doing tutoring and mentoring, and they're doing all types of things around the community that nobody knows about. They know about the protests. And then he furthermore said that there was a case in Atlanta where a guy who fought in Afghanistan had some mental issues, and he was out at the park, at the ball field, with no clothes on. And police approached him and ultimately shot him and killed him. He said that didn't even get in the news. He said, but this was a guy who had mental illness. And instead of de-escalating the situation, there appears to be the assumption, this is just another black guy, bang. And I've heard people say things like, well, black people kill black people? And I said, well, you know what that logic says? Black on black, you have black on black crime, so why are you upset when the police kill him? I said, that's the logic you're living in, that somehow, because you know that there's white on white crime as well, you know? And but those things are not emphasized. So then to your point, there seems to be the devaluing of human nature. To your first question, why I have this conversation, as a person who believes strongly in life, in the preservation of life from womb to tomb. People who claim to be pro-life don't appear to be pro-life. How can you be pro-life when it comes to abortion and look at this and say, oh, somehow it was justified? Or just be quiet and don't speak out and let's just pray. Oh, no. These black guys' lives matter, and they don't feel like the larger society believe that their lives matter. And that's why we should talk about this.
I think the outcry is for justice. Justice being that because somebody is of a different ethnicity, race, that they have the same opportunities to freedom and to life and to liberty and to happiness as a white person does. And what I'm learning more and more in this discussion as I've been able to sit with more and more people and hear more and more stories is that, again, for me, a lot of things that become natural are things that I don't have to fight for. Maybe doors are even open for me because of my skin color. Whereas for others, it is a daily struggle to have those same opportunities. Where this hits home for me probably more so is my wife and I, we have 5 children. Our 4th child we've adopted, and he's African American. And it was a stunning thing about 6 months ago as we're in a conversation with some other adoptive parents at a conference, and we're sitting down. They have older children, interracial family, and they begin to teach us and tell us, well, when your son Jaden gets pulled over by the police officer, you need to instruct him to act this way. You need to tell him to be compliant. You need to tell him to say yes. If they mistreat him, whatever, you'll come back and deal with that as the parents later on. But I have to have a conversation with my 8-year-old African-American child, Jaden, that I will not have to have with my 7-year-old son, white son, Caleb. Not only that, I'm informed that because Jaden is black, he has a 10% chance higher, 10 times greater rate of being incarcerated, simply because he's black. And he has a 2.5% times chance of losing his life, simply because he's black. And so now, this is personal. This is family. This is my son. And that's where I think we have to get past the tension of, we have to be motivated to speak into these things, because what happens is, it's really easy that if it doesn't affect us, we tend to not care. And that's often that goes back to the relationships. If I don't have a relationship with someone who I can even hear, what happened to you? I heard another pastor just recently told me he moved out to Chesapeake, first year out of Chesapeake, and he's been there for a year. His first month there, he was pulled over 7 times in the first month. I've been pulled over 7 times in my lifetime, but I'm not going to go into those examples today. But so I just have to realize that there are differences. And part of that is acknowledging that, being sensitive to that, learning. Because there's a lot of things that I've had in my life that, again, I haven't had to fight for, because there was no need to fight for. Whereas other people are living in a tension every single day about DWB. There's another thing, driving while black. There is a fear of black men for just getting in the car and driving because they might get pulled over. I don't have that fear as a white man. I just don't have that fear. And so I have to begin to understand that, again, my reality and my perspective is valuable and it's important, but it's not complete. It's not complete. And when we begin to, and part of this discussion is that we have to begin to act in humility towards one another. Philippians 2, where it says that Jesus, acting in humility, considered others better than himself. So, the first and greatest commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and then love others in the same way. What does it mean for me to love my brothers and sisters in the same way that I am loved and treated? How does that now cause me to fight for these things, to care about that there's injustices, and they begin to engage and to be a part of solutions that will help to bring about change?
Yeah, I really appreciate you all sharing that, because again, I so agree that the heart needs to change. I believe that, and maybe the beginning is to understand, for you to say that my life does not have value. That's part of the cry that we're throwaway in our society, and that the avenues for justice are closed off. I can imagine those being the seeds for care to begin to grow in the hearts of those who have thought it was okay not to care. And friends of mine that have said, my experience as a black man, if you were to know my experience as a black man were so different from yours as a white man, would you care about that? And I think that's grieving for me to hear, and for many of us to hear. I'm hoping that this kind of conversation stirs that kind of care that comes with awareness of something that we can't sweep under, we can't walk away from. Yeah, go ahead.
That's to say, part of where we see these things play out are, again, in issues of right? So it's not only white and black, then there becomes the issue of rich and poor, who has resources and who doesn't. Then which goes into issues of education. Where is education affordable? And again, all of these things go back to, if you look back to the foundation of our country, those who were denied. So we sit here today, and we sit in a predominantly black community, and really close by is a predominant white community. And we know that that is the way that it is because when the city was founded and laid out, you had to have the help live close enough to the affluent white communities because they served those communities. And so even as we sit in this place today, we look around and we see that, again, the realities that we're facing, the struggles that we're facing every day are indicative of things, of systems that have been put in place for not just the past 50 years or 100 years, but since the founding of this country, there's been a layout of things that have provided resources, opportunity to some, and have denied it to others. And I have to recognize that. I have to recognize that the city that I love and that I care about, I have to ask the question, why is it the way that it is? Why is it that? And then I have to ask the question, is that right? And then what am I going to do?
Yes. Let me ask one more question, and then maybe we can go and open up the mic just for sharing from you and or questions. But one of the things that we've wondered about, we've had now a couple of Hope Talks, and the goal of tonight was really to just ask and answer the questions, why is this an important conversation, and why should the church be having this conversation? Why should the church, in a sense, lead the way? And there's certainly possibility for deeper discussions. You talk about the community that we're in here in Park Place and Sandwich, between Colonial Place and Ghent, predominantly white. So there are issues of policing, there are issues of poverty, there are issues of crime, there are deeper issues that need to be talked about, and we need to roll up our sleeves. And in some ways, we wonder about having conversations like that, where we can invite Norfolk police officers to come and share, and give perspective and answer questions and things like that. But for tonight, just to narrow our scope, as pastors now, you've talked about, I've heard the words corners, we go into our corners, we've talked about ignoring or sweeping under the carpet. Maybe to make it more poignant, when you men look at your Facebook feeds, what drives you crazy when these things happen? As a pastor, when you see reactions from white friends, men and women, and some of the things that get put on in the boldness of Facebook, right? We all have kind of this boldness of putting something that we're not face to face with somebody, but and even your black friends, men and women, what is it that what's your cry as a pastor when you now put on that pastor hat and that leader hat and say, we do have the hope of the gospel? What is it that you wish that you could say to some things that you see on there, again, in both directions?
I'd say as a pastor, this is my personal conviction, that better conversations happen at the dinner table than online on social media. I will never hesitate. People who know me know my wife will prepare a meal, and we'll talk about these things thoroughly in the context of the kitchen table, and we'll hammer through them, and I believe it'd be more beneficial at the conclusion of the meal. Even if we end up disagreeing on some points, we can still love each other. But my biggest thing would be we can get caught up in emotionalism. We could not be clear. We could not be thoughtful. We could be too rapid in responses. We could seek to win an argument versus providing constructive criticism that's going to build that person up versus tearing them down. And so let's get together, let's get coffee, let's come by for lunch, gourmet ham and cheese sandwiches, and let's iron through these things, come by for dinner. So that'd be my biggest exhortation. Social media is profitable, but I believe the kitchen table in the living room is a better avenue to have these
I would say posting on Facebook is not courageous, it's cowardly. Because what I can do is I can sit behind a computer screen, isolated to my own thoughts and my own reality, and say whatever I want as if it doesn't affect anybody. It doesn't take any courage to do that. And so what happens is you see people don't really always have the greatest filter. That people think that just because they have a thought that everyone needs to know that in the world today. And that they just go and they start posting and without ever kind of any thought about what it is they're saying or the implications that it has. One of the questions I would say, does everybody on your Facebook feed look like you? Do you even have diversity in your Facebook feed of who you're hearing, of who you're seeing, of who you're having relationships with? There's been a quote from C.S. Lewis that I've kind of latched on to during these conversations, and I just want to read that because it summarizes to me the divide that we live in today. C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity, he says this: I fear a strong desire to tell you, and I expect you feel a strong desire to tell me, which of these two errors is the worst. That is, the devil is getting at us. He always sends errors into the world in pairs of opposites. And he always encourages us to spend a lot of time thinking about which one is the worst. You see why, of course. He relies on your extra dislike of one error to draw you gradually to the opposite one. But do not let us be fooled. We have to keep our eyes on the goal and go straight through between both errors. We have no other concern than that of either of them. We live probably in the most fragmented, polarized time I've lived in my 36 years, which is limited, I understand, of existence here on this earth. But even as I talk with others, whether it's politically or racially, we are a fragmented country. And the number one way that the devil is at work is by, again, positioning us against one another. And the way that he does that is he preys on our fears. He preys on our fears. He preys on our insecurities. And so it's much easier for me to have people around me who think like me, look like me, rather than me being willing to step across and say, I need to have greater appreciation and diversity in my life of other people. And the only way I know, I think my natural tendency is to get around people like me, is that I have to be intentional. I just have to be intentional. That may not be the coolest thing to do, but it might be, you know what, today I'm going to find one person who's not like me and begin to initiate a conversation. Doesn't mean I have to be best friends with them, but I have to realize that my perspective is limited and I need to start being more inclusive, including more people into my world, my perspective.
Yeah, I think that from a pastor's heart, well, first of all, I appreciate everybody who's come tonight to even you here because you care. And I think we're doing a lot of talking up here, but we're not experts. I'm not an expert on being black, although I've been black all my life. Because black folk disagree with what I'm saying. We're not monolithic. But I think that wrestling through the conversation, building the relationships, I think that's critical. I think it's so crucial. And I think for me, it's important, a person who likes to talk, it's important for me to listen. Because it's in the listening that I'm able to gain better understanding about the other. So far as it's concerning systems, structures, people with influence and affluence, it's important that they care to hear the voice of the other. Because we all are relational. I mean, people don't get promoted in jobs really because they're the best foot position. Come on. They get promoted because they cool with the guy, they like him, or they know somebody. You get the job oftentimes because they know somebody. We know that's really how society works. Well, if I'm white and all the people I really know are white, well, I can overlook a black person who may be better qualified for the job. But you don't have black people who really you're in a relationship with. And the same thing about African Americans. We need to build those relationships. I think we need to move to a society that people get have someone's incompetence leading. But insofar as relationships are concerned, that's how society works. Relationships. And I think as the body of Christ, it is a body with many parts that have to be in relationship. And I think that part of the challenge that we have as black and white people, particularly in Norfolk, I wasn't born here, and I've lived in other places, but I'm coming here as an outsider 8 years ago. I couldn't help but notice the lines. There's so many lines all over the place. People over here don't deal with people over there, and people over there don't. What in the world? You know? So if we can overcome those lines, black lines, white lines, or neighborhood lines, if we can overcome all of that, I think the body of Christ has an opportunity, and I do think it's an opportunity, that the more we have these hope talks, and hopefully it's not the first time here, that people start inviting friends and inviting more people to be part of the conversation. And all of a sudden, we realize we're building on type of relationships that can, before we know, we're leading in society.
And quickly, I'll add one more thing. You talk about these lines. We can be relationally impoverished. So I serve in a poor economically area of Norfolk, Virginia. So I don't want to do ministry to the poor. I trust that God has his people among these people who are financially, fiscally poor. I want to do ministry with them, so I want them to get the gospel. But I don't come as a superhero church planner or superhero Christian. I come as one who is relationally impoverished, and if I don't have a relationship with these people, I'm missing out. There's benefit for me to have relationships with people who are not like me, have a different background than me, vote differently than me, and have a different annual income than me. And if I don't want to step across the street to build that relationship, I'm actually cheating myself. So we're all impoverished. Our poverty just looks a little different than some of those in the community that we wouldn't build relationships with.
That's good. Well, why don't we, if I'm going to open up the mic here on the floor, just ask you if there's anything that you'd like to share. If part of this discussion is the community discussion, how have these things affected you? What is your perspective even of tonight? The importance of this conversation, if you have an experience that you would like to share. Maybe if we, please, we can line up maybe just behind the mic, and of course in these settings, as concise as you can be, a couple of minutes per comment and or questions.
Man, I was going to preach.
And please state your name. We'd all love to get to know you as you should.
My name is Michelle Brown. I'm a social worker by profession, and I just want to be transparent. I had a situation to occur, I think it was maybe a year or so ago. It was in December, around Christmas time. I was at Greenbrier Mall, and you know how parking is around Christmas time. So a young woman, she had an SUV. She pulled in a parking space. I was behind her. She didn't go to the next space. And I threw my hands up in the air like, really? My mother would have been disappointed because she tells me to be calm, cool, and collected. So I was not at this particular time. The young lady, she gets out of the vehicle. She says to me immediately, it's not easy to put luggage in the back of a car. And so I'm like, what is she talking about? She was explaining to me that the reason why she didn't move all the way to the next spot initially was because she was going to get some luggage, and it would have been difficult for her to put the luggage in the back of the vehicle. So immediately, I mean, it was on a Sunday. She didn't even ask me how I was doing or anything like that. But I wanted to have an attitude. Now I'm from the suburbs, not ghetto at all. But I wanted to have an attitude. And the Holy Spirit let me know you need to be cautious of how you handle this situation. Because there was a young lady who got out on the other side of the car. So you had a woman who looked like she was under 30, and then you had another young lady who looked like she was a teenager. So I said to her, I'm sorry. That changed the whole conversation. And then we proceeded to walk to the mall, and then the Holy Spirit said, ask her if she wants you to move your car. I was like, you gotta be kidding me, what? So I did that. I said, would you like for me to move my car? And she said no. And I just thought, as Christians, we really have to be mindful. When the Holy Spirit tells us to do things, we have to be obedient. But I also have to check my heart, because my first response can be anger, it can be bitterness, it can be resentment. I really need to look at what's in my heart, and when seeds are planted that will turn into weeds and cause me to be bitter, fearful, or whatever, I have to make sure that I'm constantly saying, God, help me be aware of my heart. Help me to take anger, those things out of my heart, so I can have a relationship with people who don't look like me.
Thank you. Can we give her a hand?
D.L. Moody is famous for saying this as he was praying for revival in New York City. He's known for drawing a circle around himself and praying that prayer, God, when you bring revival, when you begin in my heart first. And I think in these conversations, it's really easy for us to point fingers at other people rather than just starting with my own heart and looking and examining my own heart and realizing, even in my heart, I have prejudice, I have bias, I have fears, and I have insecurity. And I just really appreciate us not being a people that live by the flesh, but allow the Spirit of God to lead us. That's right on. So thank you for sharing that.
Hi guys, my name is Rachel, and I'm very short, so I don't know if you can hear me. I think I'm going to do this. And my question comes from listening to what's been touched on up here. There's been, I think everyone on the panel is in agreement that there's institutional and systematic racism within our justice system, our legal system, housing, education. And I'm curious, as believers, if you feel that the institutional racism within our society in the context of a fallen world can be deconstructed. And if so, besides kind of the intentional relationship, what are the practical steps that the body of Christ in our Norfolk community should be taking to engage in the deconstruction of institutional racism?
Well, I would say this, and thank you for the question, very important. I think that once we all agree, or at least understand, what is meant by systemic racism, I think that's part of the issue. Not all the time people understand what one means by that. But once we understand what we mean by that, we have a governmental system in place. We have city council. We have folks in here that I know, great to see our good friend back in the back from the city of Norfolk, Mr. Rogers, Mr. James Rogers, he's always supporting. People in positions, or people who can write to our local government, can help to shape that. But the challenge becomes, we really have to tell the two cities here in Norfolk, or to tell the two countries here in America. When a person benefits from a system, this is not only black and white, this is male and female. If a man benefits from a system that is geared toward misogyny, why would I try to change it? I'm benefiting, right? So I have to, first of all, acknowledge that there is an inequity in a benefit. And then use my position of power or my sphere of influence to advocate. And I think that's part of what we're saying here, is that there are people who are inferior or disenfranchised, or whatever language, underprivileged, whatever language you want to use, who may not have the relationships or know how to articulate, to speak truth to power, or may not know where to go in order to speak truth to power, that they need advocates. Particularly education, part of our challenge here in this country is part of the inequities in education. And when you don't have the right education, you don't even know where to go to address the issue. Or perhaps you don't even have the language to address the issue. Just recently, I started a nonprofit, and I was working on some issues with my insurance agent. And the way it was structured, very small nonprofit, and I won't go too much into it, but the way it was structured, I was trying to access workers' comp, and I was trying to explain to my insurance agent what I needed, and she was like, you can't get workers' comp. We went 2 or 3 weeks, me with my, I don't know anything about insurance. So I was trying to explain to her, she kept going to the brokers and all, trying to find the workers' comp that would work for me. For 3 weeks straight, I called the lawyer, and in an hour, I had a workers' comp. I felt stupid, to be honest with you. I said, all of this work, I said, it pays to know and to know somebody who knows. The insurance agent couldn't do what I needed because she couldn't understand what it was I was looking for. I couldn't even describe my own company because I had a deficiency, and that is I didn't know the language to articulate what it is that I needed. But a lawyer, once I finally talked to this young lawyer, she told me, the lady called, oh, that's what you're talking about. So that's what I mean by education. When people, that's just a small example to say, people that are impoverished, who don't have the education, can't articulate, they express it the best way that they can. And that's part of what we see in outbursts, right? I'm trying to say something, but I don't know exactly how to say it. Well, that's because education is so weak in those areas.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. My name is Ezra Washington. I teach right over there, Maury High School. I've been teaching there for 9 years and I'm band director there. I didn't grow up in Virginia. I grew up in Colorado. I had a short stint in the Marine Corps, 5 years, spent some time in Iraq and shot at. It was not really fun. And I never have felt, personally, but I never have seen a culture that's been so separate until I moved here. I grew up in Colorado Springs. I've been pulled over driving while black more times than I can count. You know. But when I go to the lunchroom at Maury High School, I feel like I'm in 1952. It's really strange to me, and I dove in when I got my undergrad. I dove in because I love music, I did band, but I dove in at Maury High School because I got a chance to student teach there, and I just saw, man, these people, wow, like they just, it's just so clearly defined. You go and see the level of achievement, and it has this curve over the years for the white kids, and it has the exact same curve, 10 points lower for the black kids. Nobody does anything about it. I feel, and it's taken me some time, and I've wrestled with it a lot with the Spirit, and trying to accept this idea of this institutionalized racism, because I know this is kind of like the buzzword that's going around nowadays. So, done a lot of research on my own, looked at a lot of original texts and things like that, and it's clear that it's certainly there. I didn't want to admit it this time ago, 5 years, but I feel sometimes that if we're supposed to, as Christians and as a church, combat what that is, I feel that our jumping point needs to be an understanding how it got to be. Obviously, the root of it is sin. That's the sin. We can all agree with that. But along the way, how did that sin take its action? Was it just America as a whole deciding to do certain things to, coming out of the whole slavery situation? Probably not, because hundreds of thousands of people died fighting about it. So it wasn't all of America. There were people that put their flag in the ground and said, I want to not have this. And then even that got taken about, well, if you're not going to do that, let's make sure we can still do this. Now we got Jim Crow. And now we got the KKK. Now we got lynchings. And now we have all these things. And throughout history, it's been I know this is a safe place, but it's been a certain group of people that are trying to get away from it, and it's been a different group of people that have been trying to keep it. And it's not black and white people, it's people that think a certain way are fighting to keep it the way that it was. And it's not the people that many people might think, and then there's another group of people that are trying to make it better. In both cases, I think, and I've felt in my life personally especially, that in both cases we're doing it in a deficient type of way, trying to make it better in a way that's doomed to failure because it's not rooted in the scriptures. It's rooted in, we just got to be unified, and we can just either shake off who we are so that we can be unified and just forget our past, or it's B, we all need to start thinking the same way. And step away from our mindset. You know, and neither way is rooted in the scriptures. You know, how are we, you know, how am I in my 9th year over here at Moray High School, almost by the end of my 10th year, because I started halfway through the year, how am I supposed to, in a situation like that where I'm forced to make the white kids play music with black kids, and I'm just, to be honest, it hasn't worked. I've been there 10 years, I started a jazz band, it started to look like it was going to go, and then you get blowback from everybody. You get blowback from NSU, you get blowback from ODU. You know, some of these people at the tops of some of these institutions, I got my undergrad at ODU. You know, like I said, I'm not from here, I don't care. But how am I supposed to, for my students, and now for my students that are going off into the world, how am I supposed to show them a picture of, yeah, this is the system, but it can be better, and there are steps to take, but we need to understand where it came from. Like which direction do we need to go in for that? I think that's the tip of the iceberg, I guess.
I love your wrestle, brother. You're trying to live out your faith in your current vocation. So you're not a pastor, you're not a missionary, you're a missionary in that God has called you to the vocation here, working with instruments and music. And just as an educator, you have an opportunity. You may not be able to open up the text and unpack it, God's plan, but you can incorporate in the music that you're teaching historical perspectives broadly in North America, but even here in Norfolk. And I think the students would enjoy it, and I think you have an opportunity to call them to something just different and better than the trajectory of the history that's played out over the last 100, 200 years locally. So I'd say local history, integrated, and just paint a beautiful picture and make it appealing for them to join in it. And I think you're honoring God in your vocation. Just like the question you asked, I think there's a robust turn to fleshing out our Christianity and our vocation. And that doesn't mean we wear a Jesus Saves t-shirt, but we take biblical principles and flesh them out in whatever vocation, job that God has called us to.
I'm Bruce Wright. One thing struck me what Ezra said about people that don't want things to change. And I thought about that, and it's true. I think that we all need to, as Christians, look at the perspective of when we see things on TV, from the media, or we hear from politicians. We need to understand that I guess not believe them all the time. In other words, they want to stay in control. And that political realm is a hard thing to break. It disappoints me when I see leaders, so-called leaders, in politics and in the community that don't stand up for certain things. I think we just need to understand that political sphere, we have a tendency to want to stay out of it. And the secular world doesn't want us in it. So, the other thing is that I think we also need to understand that police officers, most of them, like you say, are good. There's a few bad ones. They need to be weeded out. But we have to understand, they have a job like we do. They're trying to keep the peace and protect us. And I didn't hear much from that side here. That's it.
Yeah, I think that's very important, extremely important. I hinted at it earlier, but I didn't go into it. I think that we cannot make this either you're on the black side or the blue side. Again, these lines. We need police officers. I've been actively involved with and very supportive of Chief Goldsmith here in Norfolk, because I think that he has the right heart. I think he wants to do the right thing. I think the community-based policing that he's putting in place is extraordinary, and I've been very visible. In fact, I went through the fairness and policing training that the police force went through. I went through it with the command staff, and there's going to be another one at the end of this month that he's invited me to go through as well. I think because we absolutely need police, and I think we need to debunk the idea that if you are speaking against racism, somehow you're speaking against police, because that's not the case. But at the same time, I think we have to acknowledge that African Americans' orientation with police for many, many years has not been the same as whites, because police, from its origin in this country, were positioned against blacks. In slavery, they were never necessarily protecting black people in the early stages. I mean, the lynchings, police. Sicking dogs on people who were seeking for justice, police. I mean, police were they were protecting unjust laws. And that's the historical orientation that African Americans have with police. So, and then this continued driving while black only reinforces those stories that our parents, I mean, they're not that far removed from black and white fountains, right? My dad and mom talked about this. I grew up hearing these stories. So whenever we encountered the police, it was only another experience to contribute to this negative narrative. So I think that we have to at least acknowledge that that's a reality. At the same time, when I first started, I said I have these competing emotions. At the same time, while I'm upset with the police who killed Alta Sterling and Philando Castile, now I find myself on the blue side Friday night. And I'm thinking, I'm feeling like, why do I have to pick a side here? You shouldn't have to pick a side. All of it.
The scriptures teach us how, as believers, we are to live in a pagan world. I think we need to be reminded that the scriptures are talking about the first century church who's under intense persecution for following Jesus, where their lives are endangered, and yet written within this context, we're reminded of a few things. One is that our hope ultimately is not in this world. We have to be reminded that this is not our ultimate hope. That doesn't mean we don't fight for justice here in this world, but our hope ultimately is not in this world. It's the one who has conquered death and is alive. It's Jesus. It's Him. And it's He that we put our peace, our hope, and our trust in. The other thing is that we are called to be, we are not of this world, but we're sent into this world. We're not of this world. We're aliens. We're foreigners in this world, as 1 Peter tells us. This is not our home and our hope in this world. But we are called and we are sent into this world to be salt and to be light. And so to the teacher over here at Moray, to the best that you can, keep fighting the fight of what it means for you to be salt and light in Moray High School. I'm going to pray for you about that. But what does that mean? That is the right fight to be in. And the right calling of you that you're not of this world, but you're in. The final thing is that Scripture teaches us throughout a broken and unjust system how believers are to respond. That we are to submit to authority. The government has a purpose in our lives. Even bad government and unjust government are still ordained within the sovereignty of God. Oh, Lord. Here we go. Let's go. Ding, 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 ding. Here we go. And so, within the context, there is a call for us to respond not of this world, but to have a response that models a different kingdom, the kingdom that we're ultimately a part of.
I'm not particularly used to this, so please bear with me. My name is Henry Coker. I've been blessed really to never really have to deal with a lot of racism. I have had a few. I can only think of 3 at the moment. I do feel like the enemy has sadly infiltrated into a lot of our system. This is one reason why the world is the way it is. This is a world of sin. We are the doctors, we are the peacemakers. We're meant to go out and talk to the sick. Particularly for me, I'm wondering how exactly would you say we should do that? Because I understand Black Lives Matter, but there's also an issue in our own home as African Americans. Not too long ago, a friend of mine's, an unbelievable, positive, blessed person, had passed because he was trying to protect one of my close friends, his close friend as well, Jose. A robber came up to him at the bus stop, and the first thing he did, because the robber was mad that he didn't have enough money for the bus stop. So, first thing he did was try to grab the gun, tell Jose and the other guy to run. We have a problem also in our system, in our house, that we need to fix. And it does start with education, the economy. We need jobs. We need to get the kids in the home. We also need to work in communities because it's beyond blood. We all are family. Every last one of us. If not by blood, but by spirit. And particularly for me, I'm wondering how exactly in this world that we are not of, but we are in, how exactly are we going to start working on that and get rid of this system of systematic racism?
Mobilize the panel here, so somebody else want to speak, and if not, I guess I'll be staying. Well, no, thanks for that question. I think we have to have personal responsibility. I don't think anything that we say will negate the need for personal responsibility. But I do at the same time believe that some of the systems that have been put in place have produced some of the situations in the families that we have contributed to some of the situations in the family. Particularly as you put spot on, education is one, economics is another. When one has to work 2 and 3 jobs just to survive, to live in the projects, who's raising the kids? Right? So we have a system in place that you have to work tremendously, right? Don't have accessibility, don't have influence and affluence. You got to understand now, African Americans didn't come to this country with $1 million, right? So it's been a hard time just to push up. My family, my dad was a school teacher, had 8 children. He had to work his fingers to the bone, right? My mom could not work because she needed to be at home with the kids. It's not like they can put 8 kids into daycare, right? So, but thankfully, the struggle worked for us, but it was hard. It was harder than with some others. So there was a big deal of personal responsibility there. But in the inner cities, what we see is a proliferation. It's a snowball effect. When kids are left to their own, they develop survival mechanisms. I think the systems that have been put in place have protected the ones that the system was put in place for. And others have fallen on the wayside, and that's part of the advocacy. That's one of the issues, that's one of our, we'll struggle about this later, but this whole idea, you just obey the system. Well, what does that mean? This country has not progressed by simply being obedient to the system. We have to sometimes disobey the system. We have to sometimes participate in making new laws. We have to be advocates, right? You have to be willing to be, you can't just be a good guy. I'm just going to be a good Christian and be a good example. Well, that over at Moore High School, it ain't going to change by being a good guy. I can tell you that. That ain't going to change by being a good guy. You have to speak up and speak out. You have to participate in the process of change, because being obedient to oppressive laws did not change oppressive laws. And I think as Christians, this mushiness of just be obedient because systems in place that God put in place. God put slavery in place, not killing of those black people on the plantation. I just disagree with you on that.
I didn't say that. I said government in itself. The institution of government is ordained by God.
But it needs to be changed. It needs to be perfected so that it can mirror God. Because right now it's not mirroring God. Because it's being abused in ways that is oppressive to certain groups of people. And I think at that point, we have to fight for justice. And we have to sometimes risk being ostracized, risk being accused, misused, and misunderstood. Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't famous because he was a good guy.
Of course, we're sitting in a country that was founded on civil disobedience, right? Okay, so just again, some context for us of who we are as a country. But what I'm saying is as Christians, I'm not saying that we are to be passive or to be walked over, but I am saying this, that the message of the church and how the church engages the world, the rhetoric of the church, the mission of the church is distinctly different from the world. I'm absolutely saying that there is a difference there, and that we need to, if not, we are no different from the world, and we lose the effectiveness of what we have. And so I'm not saying that there's not cause for us to be passive, but I am saying the tone, the manner, the way in which we conduct ourselves through that matters. It matters in how we honor God as we fight against injustice.
We're going to do these two questions. We're coming to the end, and we want to do these two questions, and then we'll wrap up.
My name is Alan. I grew up outside of Chicago, 45 minutes away. I was adopted. My mom used to beat me up, and I was adopted by an older couple. So I grew up kind of angry. I was constantly getting into fights, and where I'm from, they recruit you to be in a gang. So I was in the gang, and I had to take a beat to get out of it. So I grew up angry, and my mom tried to put me in a private school, and I didn't fit in well with the white kids. So one of the kids called me the N-word, so I beat him, and then I got kicked out of school. So I knew that I was going to go to jail or be dead. So I went to the military, and that's why I came here. And so I served 8 years in the military, did about 5 in the shipyards, and along the way, I made a lot of mistakes. I became an alcoholic, getting in trouble. But what I've learned is my conduct. Being a man, you have to watch your conduct, learn how to talk, learn how to walk, look a man in the eyes. And this right here, this is very helpful that white people and black people can get together and talk about issues that really matter. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. I appreciate that. Can we give Alan a hand? That was very good.
First of all, I want to thank you three and thank Parkview for putting this together. I mean, to me, this is the start of what the church really has to do. And I will tell you that this subject, has been resonating in my heart and just what's going on. And I have to say, Kevin, hearing some of the stuff that you've been talking and everything, and I appreciate it all, but some of the stuff I hear from white churches and from white individuals, and a couple of things that just have struck in my heart or whatever here. I think one of the things you said, Antipas, was, we are so as a church for pro-life, but yet there's no outcry when the black are oppressed. And then somebody else talked about the heartbeat of change, but how do you have the heartbeat of change when life has no value? And I know you had said, Kevin, this is a sin issue, and I agree with you, that this is a sin issue. But God sent his son, Jesus Christ, to deal with the sin issue, and then he put his church here on the earth to take care of the sin issue and to reconcile it, to bring people back. And I know the thing I've been struggling with the most is we talk about these lines and we talk about these divides, and yet we act like we can't go over them. And the world system can't, but Christ has a church that can actually do it. And I think this is a very big start. But I've always been thinking about the church. If things are going to happen, the church has to change. And I look at the church, and I know there was an earlier comment, and we all know there's an all-white church, there's an all-black church, there's an Hispanic church, or whatever. And there's not really this divide that is opening up in the churches, on the pulpit itself, and even, in there. And I just want to know, as church leaders, how do you see that we as, in the church leadership, change this as far as opening up and allowing, we say we can't go over to the other side, but why not bringing the other side over to us? And I guess the thing I think about in my mind is Jesus Christ. When he went down, he came and he went to the woman that's Samaritan woman. And she said, what are you doing here? What do you have any dealings to do with me as a Samaritan woman? And he went over there to show her love and to show her the gospel and everything. And I just think as a church, a lot of times we aren't doing the things we need to do to, show the leadership, to show the world that we are different, that our call is different from the call of the world. And like I said, this is a great way to start. This is conversation that we need to have. I just think that the church, if we just come back and are quick to explain it away, I think that's what one person says, we look at these issues and we're very quick and say, yeah, well, we can't do anything about it. But I think we can do something about it. I think this is a very good starting point, but it's only a starting point. I think we've all been in meetings before and everybody gets together and says, yeah, we got this issue and everything, and everybody's writing their notes, they leave, and you feel happy about yourself because you were at a meeting like this, but we haven't done anything about it. And so my plea, or my question to y'all is, as church leaders, how can we change the church? How do we get this conversation going beyond just these three churches into other churches that are around here? Greatly different.
That's such a great and perfect way to end, because you're asking the final question that I was going to ask. But I appreciate it. Because this is a hope talk, right? And if we think about the hopelessness because of sin in our world that only exists to divide and to propagate the cycles of division, the narratives that white America believes, the narratives that black America lives by, the politicizing of those narratives that we see in our world, the only hope is that there is another narrative. That there is a narrative that really can change the world. I think that's a great way to end. For you, each of you, to just answer, what is your hope? What hope exists if the church indeed does lead the way in this? And do you have hope with regard to these issues?
Briefly, I think Scott Sundquist in his book, Understanding Christian Mission, he said racial and tribal reconciliation has to be a central pillar of what is orthodox, right? So we can't ignore these issues or we're in danger of being, of heresy. A central pillar of orthodoxy must be racial reconciliation and diversity of leadership, ethnically, stage of life, economically. A diversity of leadership is a good place to start in the church. I'm not talking about affirmative action. I'm saying be very intentional in raising up a diversity of leaders that reflect the diversity of the city. I'm bringing home here in Norfolk. And my default is always going to be the home, because leadership begins in the home. And so I just want to challenge everybody, how are you using your home? Who is at your house? Who is at your dinner table? If it's only people like you, you're missing out. In church leadership, again, all the qualifications have for pastoral leadership, have a robust foundation in the home. And we should be very intentional, over-intentional, about grabbing individuals, training and discipling them in the context of the home, that they might be clear leaders in the context of God's church. So, just very basic.
I think in particular, history again, where during the Civil Rights Movement, the first round, the white evangelical church abandoned its post, where we did not stand with our brothers and sisters. There were some who did. But when you look back at history, you see many fled. If you want to look at the integration of schools in Norfolk, we had white flight, where many families left the city of Norfolk to move to Virginia Beach, Suffolk, and Chesapeake. And you have churches that were predominantly white that when integration began to take place, abandoned their churches to go outside because they didn't want to integrate. And so first, I think we have to recognize that just even locally here in Hampton Roads, our sins. We need to repent of our past. We need to ask for forgiveness of where we failed to stand for issues of justice, and to receive God's mercy, forgiveness, to ask for forgiveness even from our brothers and sisters who are in those moments of maybe I wasn't the one doing it, but just representing the church, the white church in particular, of our failures to stand with. And that's why, in part, why we're here so many years later, dealing with the same issues. Do I have hope? Absolutely. Because one of the things that we have as believers is we know the end of the story. And I think one of the shocking moments for me as a Christian was I received Jesus when I was 15, and one of the shocking moments was the day when I found out that Jesus wasn't white. Talk about shattering your worldview. I mean, every picture you see is of a white Jesus. And then I remember someone telling me, it was a guy I played football with in high school. I went over to his house and he had a black Jesus on the wall. And I was like, you have a black Jesus. That's so funny. You know, the ignorant white guy. And he was like, Jesus was probably more black than white. And I was like, what? And I go home and ask my youth pastor, I was like, can you believe that? And he was like, And so even my depiction and understanding of Christianity, if you want to go back to the 1600s of where the Anglo-English version of Jesus, the white, blue-eyed Jesus came about, was even our Christian experience has painted who Jesus really is. And part of the beauty that we have is that we know the end story. The end story is one day that people from every tongue, tribe, and nation will be before the throne of Jesus. And so here's the indictment on me today. If I'm not willing to start to fight for that and work for that today, I'm probably not going to enjoy heaven that much. And if I want to see heaven come to earth, which is what Jesus' prayer was, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. How it is in heaven, we're praying that comes down here to this earth. If I'm praying for that, then I need to realize that it is not a whole bunch of white people in the room singing, "Great is our God." That it's diverse, it's beautiful, it's different colors, it's different songs, it's different cultures, tongue, tribe, and nation coming before one throne singing hallelujah to the Lord. And so that is the end of our story. That is where we're going. We can have confidence in that. The question is whether or not we are going to join God in his mission. Whether we're going to be part of joining him with what the end story is by working for heaven to come to earth now. To see depictions of places where there are injustice. In heaven, there is no injustice. God is a God who shows no favoritism, as Hebrews says. And so when I see systems that are in place that show favoritism to one group of people over another, I have to recognize that and say, that's not what heaven's like. I need to fight against that here on this earth today. It causes my faith to action today here on this earth. Why I have a hope, an enduring hope that one day, it will never get perfect and right in this world. It doesn't mean we don't fight for it or strive for it, but it does mean that one day it will be when he comes again, and I have hope in that.
That's great. Thank you for the last question. I think, one, that even research, secular sociological research proves that the chief mechanism for transformation in our communities, it really is the institution called the church. There really is no other, just secularly speaking, there is no other institution that can make the type of community impact, particularly in urban communities, that the church can. Now, I don't think the church always know that or realize that, because I think it's more than just a sociological reality. It's a theological truth. The church is the answer for the world. Now, I believe that practically speaking, how we do that, we have to move beyond the way we've done church and activate our faith in different ways. One is as it relates to African Americans and whites. Let me just paint it this way. Now, there can be arguments about what I'm saying, but just go with me here. If at one time the mechanism for developing this country in the 1700s were African Americans, all the way up to the industrialization, all the way up into not that long ago, African Americans. My grandmother worked at Goody's haircare product, but when the jobs were shipped out, she's dead now. Those folks get laid off. Just systemically, inch by inch, black people were just not needed, presumably, at one level. What black people used to do, machines and computers can do that now. So if you don't learn how to run those things, we almost dispensable in society in that way. And I think that, and I'm saying that straightforward because I think that may be an overstatement, but I think you know what I'm saying. And that is the case also when it comes to churches. You can go to church, have your church, build your church, plant your church, because you're, as a people, whites have access, affluence, connections, things like that are able to just get things going. And when we talk about multicultural churches in America, they're mostly run by white men. Why? I think it's because black churches would love to have white people in it. You have no need to go there. Black people as a people have always looked to white people for resources. So it's easier, and we're bicultural. We can easily go into your church and lift our hands and do it your way. But if you go over there to the Sanctified Church where they run around the church and all this kind of African expressions, yeah, you can do without that. You may not get entry in that way, so then you can go. So we have this sort of cultural thing where we have people, when you, just like a man, I have certain benefits of being a man. I'm trying to make a parallel here from that situation. That why would I give up being a man when being a man is working for me? Just because women want to get greater access, more jobs, and things like that. You have to give up part of yourself in order to enter into this. You have to be willing to share resources in a way that you don't necessarily need to in order to equalize the playing field. And I think that those types of self-sacrifices, that goes beyond, I surrender all. It's I surrender all in a practical sense to help lift the playing field. Because right now, the playing field is just it's not the same. I'll say this in closing. This is privilege and underprivilege. When I was in college, one of my best friends, I got my best friend in class. One of my best friends was white. But anyway, I was in the Grange College. He dropped out of school, I think, in the 9th grade. I was in college. He was working on a job. He was the vice president of his company. And I was sitting there struggling through college. And he said, "You're smart enough," because at a certain level, his heart was good. We were really like brothers. We had really passed the whole idea of being white and black. We were cool and everything. And he said, "Oh, you can't do this." Yeah. I said, brother, let me just tell you. You dropped out of school in 9th grade. You're the vice president of a company. You think if I dropped out of school in 9th grade, I would even know who to go to, who would trust me to be the vice president of the company? I said, that's privilege and underprivilege, you see. Even with a doctorate degree now, I feel, and I can see in certain cases, people would trust me to be a professor